Little in size but larger than life, cartoons have had a tangible impact on the American public. Cartoons, which are pictures with or without words that convey a message, originally began as a form of political judgment or promotion. Supposedly inspired by Leonardo da Vinci's caricatures, political cartoons have been popular since the early 18th century. Pictured, I have Benjamin Franklin's famous Join or Die cartoon, originally published in his Pennsylvania Gazette in 1754. He published this cartoon, largely recognized as America's first political cartoon, to promote the unification of the separated British colonies against the Native Americans and French. Comedic elements were introduced later on in political cartoons, first appearing in Europe in the mid-19th century. The first purely comedic strips followed soon after, beginning in the late 19th century with artists gradually moving the art form to what it is today. Simple and effective, cartoons can convey profound messages in hilarious illustrations and modest wordage. America is a democracy, and as a result, politics are a central feature of daily conversation and inquiry. America also has the First Amendment, guaranteeing freedom of press and freedom of speech. Born out of these central American concepts is the popularity of political cartoons. During the 1920s, political cartoons ranged from propaganda to satire to opinion. Cartoons criticized and praised immigration, feminism, prohibition, modernism, traditionalism, and more. Political cartoons depicted the double-sided reality of the 1920s. On the outside, progress, freedom, industry. On the inside, poverty, agricultural depression, organized crime, and moral vices. In the first cartoon, printed in the Chicago Tribune in 1922, we see a woman climbing up the stairs of government. She's made huge strides, making it past school trustee, mayor, and representative, and is poised for the jump to senator. This cartoon shows the support and rise of women in politics. In the second cartoon, printed in the Chicago Tribune, also in 1922, we see a bald eagle. It represents the U.S. aviation program, and it is about to have its wings clipped by an appropriations cut from the House Military Appropriations Committee. A senator is running to stop the proceedings with the news that the Japanese had allotted $200 million for aviation. This cartoon is a satire of the U.S. government. It shows that the U.S. did not prioritize the aviation program enough, and that the government's budget was based on a keeping up with the Joneses strategy. In the cartoon on the left, we see a police officer, the law, shooting with his gun of justice a hooded, money-bagged criminal representing organized crime. The criminal is holding the bloody axe that is gang rule and is standing in front of bootleg profits. Gang rule, pardon, bond money, money to bribe politicians, money to bribe jurors, money to beat the law, and money to hire the best lawyers. Organized crime is the villain and the law the hero in this scenario. This comic shows the inadequate force the police have against the consequence of prohibition, organized crime, and the corrupted government officials. In the cartoon on the right, we see the average imperfect mortal who doesn't like extremes in any direction. He runs from the lawlessness, immodesty, immorality, and irreverence of his countrymen, as well as the fanaticism, blue laws, intolerance, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. The mortal prefers no man's land, the moderate position. This cartoon depicts the flaws behind the glamour and progressivism of the Jazz Age, as well as the traditionalists stuck in the past. In Sky Roads, aviation takes center stage. It was developed out of the popularity of Charles Lindbergh, the pilot who became an international superstar after making the first transatlantic flight. Sky Roads' first 18 months of comic strips centered around the international travels and adventures of Ace, Zack, Spider, and Buster, and each comic strip is a continuation of the previous one. These heroes crossed paths and fists with moonshiners, renegade Englishmen, Russian counter-revolutionaries, and opium traders. Sky Roads also included aviation fun facts with its strips, mixing adventure with technology. After the first 18 months, the story shifts to include more fantastical elements, including less realistic aviation and international archvillains. Lasting only from 1929 to 1942, this series was a popular but short-lived cartoon, showcasing the popularity of pilots, the desire for adventure, and the increased globalization of the age. Only a few months after the 19th Amendment passed, Winnie Winkle popped into newspapers. The comic strip shown on the picture is the first ever Winnie Winkle cartoon. As a working-class city girl, Winnie Winkle showcased the newfound socioeconomic position many women faced at the time. Over the course of the early strips, Winnie finds a job assisting a safety pin manufacturer. Always fashionably dressed and supporting her parents, Rip Van and Mrs. Winkle, as well as her brother Periwinkle, Winnie was the image of the modern girl. And many of the strips center around her hilarious interactions with her parents, her husband Hunts, her clothing wishes, and her on-the-job adventures. The comic presents a two-sided image. On the one hand, we have a hard-working, industrious, independent woman who's looking to succeed in life. On the other hand, we have a self-obsessed, materialistic, gold-digging flapper who puts on airs. Winnie Winkle, through herself and through her cartoon, showcased the double-sided nature of the 1920s. Fritzi Ritz was your pretty girl archetype. Like Winnie Winkle, Fritzi Ritz was a modern girl. She dressed in flapper attire, played sports with men, attempted a job, and strang along men. Unlike Winnie Winkle, Fritzi Ritz was well off, and her comic strips showcase the glitz and glamour in which she lived. Her cartoons are funny but repetitive, often centering around Fritzi's materialistic, independent, and ditzy character. Fritzi showcased the consumer cultural, social liberation, and sexual freedom of the Jazz Age, as well as the stereotypes surrounding well-off young women in the 20s. That all changed in the 1930s when Fritzi began caring for her niece Nancy. Nancy took center stage, and the comic strip was renamed Nancy in 1938, with Fritzi as a supporting character. During this time, Fritzi went from the headstrong ditz to the vanilla, compliant, and caring mother figure. This cartoon showcases the huge shift in the public opinion of women in the 1920s through both its 1920s comic and its shift back to the traditional in the 1930s. Lasting from 1923 to 1945, Skippy was another popular but short-lived cartoon. It was a progenitor to the Peanuts, Calvin Hobbes, and Dennis the Menace cartoons. Skippy centers around Skippy, a young, mischievous boy. Skippy's frequent adventures include sports and wagon races, and the comic appealed to readers young and old. In some cartoons, Skippy parodies adult behavior, showing the nonsensical side to actions adults do without thinking. And sometimes Skippy cartoons showcased events that happened in real time, but through a kid's eyes. Overall, Skippy shows the newfound love of youth and obsession with sports of the age, and shows a second hilarious perspective of serious adult activities and philosophies.